Allyship, Sisterhood from the 1980s and today, a podcast from the Tees Women Poets. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Dianne. I'm a poet and a woman who grew up in the 1980s. I still wear my acid house roots with pride, and I still love my DMs.
This episode is made from snippets of conversations gathered during our new Sisterhood project, in which Teesside Archives and the Tees Women Poets teamed up to research, celebrate and learn from the local women's movements of the 1980s.
You'll hear from activists, archivists, writers, feminists, workshop participants and women who spent years building community around Teesside.
Voices, memories and reflections all stitched together with care. Full interviews of all of this will be available at Teesside Archives and on the Tees Women Poets YouTube channel. When I say the words, the 1980s, what immediately comes to mind for you?
Margaret Thatcher and the miners' strike.
Music and the fashions.
Razzmatazz on the telly.
Nightclubbing. I'm of that era though, for not going clubbing, getting all dressed up in the new romantic gear.
For me, I remember the 80s quite fondly because of the music. Music was a big thing in the 80s, it really was. I mean, 80s music still is, but it really was a background to things, and we used it to tell stories, to tell get your point of view over. It freed up a lot of the world. Boy George, he was, what is it, a girl, is it a boy? He was massive at the time. Madonna was very controversial, and then slowly began to say, yeah, it's all right to be gay, it's all right to be lesbian, and then, it took a long time for it to be accepted in gay marriage and things like that. So yeah, everybody knew it went on, but it was just behind closed doors and quiet, Couldn't talk about it, couldn't put it in books, couldn't put it in literature, people weren't allowed to talk about it in school, so yeah. I'm Catholic, so you can imagine what my, school in mine, we were taught by nuns.
The AIDS crisis, which obviously adversely affected the LGBT community, obviously the hatred and the bigotry, discrimination, a lot of it from politicians, the media, wider society.
And I was working in the health service then, and the HIV problem arose, and I think quite a lot of us had to sort of sit up and think, oh, this is something we haven't encountered much before, but we had to deal with it.
Yeah.
In a compassionate way. No, I think it was just quite a culture shock for some of us who'd been brought up in certain ways, that all of a sudden we had to accept that, there were differences, and we had to deal with that and accept that, and, treat people with compassion.
Must have been, because there was a whole, because they didn't know how it was spread for so long, there was all fears about touching or being in the same room as,
the iceberg. Can you remember the iceberg? Which basically was like, just don't have sex, otherwise you will die.
The second podcast you've talked about an iceberg that will kill people.
Iceberg traumatised me. Can anyone else remember the advert with the iceberg?
I remember the kind of the tombstone kind of thing.
Yeah, the tombstone.
In our old building, we were clearing some of this stuff away, and there was an original poster, and the archivist of the day, Kimberly, she said, what on earth is this? Because she couldn't believe it because she was young and she didn't. Yeah. And then was one of those AIDS don't die of ignorance with the tombstone. I should have kept it.
Yeah, you need it for the exhibition.
I ripped it off and threw it in a bin. I couldn't believe it was there. And this is in the, probably about 2014, 2015 time.
Swainby Road.
Do I remember Swainby Road? Howie.
Do you remember that there was a little gay community?
Yes.
You remember them?
I got my mattress from somebody's garden from Swainby Road.
Thank you, that saved the funds to the council to get it moved again. Well, like you, I'm a straight woman, and I think certainly within my lifetime, it was still swept under the carpet and people didn't come out. And I would think the 80s was when HIV was, the endemic. And surprisingly, in this macho culture, I don't know so much about lesbians, but certainly amongst gay men, in this macho culture where it wasn't sort of easy, there was this little enclave in Swainby Road. They were very camp,
Very out there.
There was no trying to sweep it under the carpet. There was a group of gay men who were very camp, loud and proud.
Yeah.
And I always
felt
felt quite inspired.
Yeah, I did.
Good on you.
And it was so because I had lots of friends that had to go to London to come out. Like everybody knew, but it wasn't until they went to London and then they came out because they couldn't be. But this little, you've just jogged my memory. And they weren't really persecuted of my. I mean, I didn't have their lived experience, but
it was just amazing.
Swainby Road for you.
Yeah. I love that. So there was still a lot of cultural issues, the emergence of the women's movement, the political implications. I do remember the Reclaim the Night marches, and I remember certainly taking part in one.
We had fire in us that night, and for one cracking second, Middlesbrough was ours. Now the line's been drawn from suffragettes straight to us, and we're not whispering, we're not waiting, we are not victims, we are not polite, we're bloody furious. We walk not because we feel safe, but because these streets were never theirs to own. We walk because we are not done yet, not even close. We walk to reclaim the night. How did you feel as a woman in the 80s? Were you aware of the women's movement or
not at all?
Not at all. Was there women's groups? Was it part of like a prayer group or a women's group or?
No.
No. So did you feel isolated or it just was the way it was?
A lot of the women, back then, I think they were isolated, especially the Asian community. They didn't really speak out much or go out to any places where there were any talks going on, or they didn't really socialise that much.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So when we were at school, so we were it was different because there was we were seeing different things, a different life, and it's hard. It was hard for us to be in a Western country and get used to Western people, and for some people it was more difficult, to mix.
Because I was a member of a political party, and we used to go around the streets and knock on doors and canvass people's opinions, and when I met with people, Asian residents, a lot of the women couldn't engage because they didn't speak English, and I'm just trying to understand really that there would have been, as you said, a lot of women didn't go out, didn't get involved in the community, and what were the opportunities to learn English as a second language?
They were very difficult. It was very difficult in those times. See, my father was different, his views were different, and my sister, when she went on to study, she became a pharmacist, and people still label her in the community as the first pharmacist.
Wow.
And she was the first, they say that she was the first woman that was allowed to study.
Your father must have
yes,
been ahead of his time, mustn't he?
Yes, he gives her options. If we wanted to study, we could, but a lot of girls didn't have that option. Most of my friends had to, when they left school, they had to get married. They had no choice, which they now regret having a voice, But that happened to them. It's really difficult.
So interesting, isn't it? Because we were around the same age, and it's so interesting that we grew up in the same
My friends
place.
didn't have that choice.
Yeah.
They couldn't learn to drive, weren't allowed to go on to further education. They had to get married. And if you didn't do what your parents said, that was something else. They didn't want to go against their parents' wishes.
My mum was an activist, so I was dragged to Greenham Common, and so I had a very different type of childhood. In my family, we were feminists with an F. So I wouldn't call it anything else. I think the doing and the action was just expected, and we did it. But we very proudly and loudly shouted the fact we were feminists. And my mum, if anybody referred to God and they called him he, she'd say she, and you know, all of those like little microaggressions were very welcome in our house. So that's just me. What about it? Did you think of yourself as a feminist in the 80s, or was it just how you were?
There wasn't allowed in South Bank. Yeah, no. It was still a very women at the kitchen sink, and the men went out to earn the crust and stuff. But then, of course, the steelworks closed, and it wasn't so easy for the men to go out and earn the crust. And sometimes they had to be at home, and the women went and got shop jobs and checkout assistants and things like that. And they became the breadwinners, or they were bringing home the biggest pay packet. So men had to sort of like think, oh, well, I can't treat her like. So there was a lot of change in the 80s for a lot of men. I think they had to rethink the whole attitude, especially in the northeast, where you're brought up, where the man is the breadwinner and the woman stays at home and looks after the children. That is not the case now. In the 80s, I think that idea was still there a bit. Maybe by the end of the 80s, it had changed quite a lot because of the steelworks closing, ICI went, the big firms that had employed thousands of men only went down to hundreds, you know. So they all had to find somewhere else to go.
And there was because of all the unemployment in the early years of the 80s, women were encouraged not to leave the jobs for the men. You know, really, you should be at home. You know, you don't need to be out at work while the men have the jobs.
I was also very active in the trade union movement, and union meetings were after work. And you'd come into this meeting and you'd get into the nitty-gritty of it, and then the women would start standing up to leave because they had to go home and cook their husband's tea.
I remember being at a meeting at Billingham Town Hall, and there wasn't a ladies' toilets.
Oh my goodness.
I think for me, the 80s, you didn't even see the money. Everyone just pitched in, and maybe I have an idealistic view of it because my mum was an activist, but if somebody needed something, you gave them it. You didn't go to get it off the government, if that makes sense. And I think we kind of lost that so if somebody was struggling or getting divorced or getting hurt, you just step in, and I think people are a lot more cautious now to step in.
I think back to, if you look at the miners' strike, how the community tried to hold together, and it was much more supportive, and we became more selfish as a society as a result of those.
Become more siloed
because
and more isolated.
You were encouraged to chase the money and want all this designer gear, and that was what was portrayed to you. And there were these stereotypes of the champagne swilling yuppies, that kind of thing. And people, I think, generally speaking, became a bit more selfish.
Around in the 80s, and I was just thinking, like, life is so much different now for children. When I was a kid, used to take a washing line to school to play. We all used to play skipping, so we had like one big washing line, and we take turns like do it, and then like the whole was like the 15-20 girls sort of playing, singing rhymes and things like that. You just don't see that.
Before the internet, Women found each other differently. Posters on toilet doors, handwritten notes, numbers passed quietly between people.
And zines became an essential part of that network.
They really felt like their own ecosystems, messages travelling between women, communities, protests, events, and everything took effort back then. There was no internet, no easy printing, often no money. People were making things by hand at kitchen tables.
And Teesside's own Sisterhood zine carried community information, protests, poetry, services, and support, shared woman to woman.
I think historically that's always been the case with things like zines, because they're very low cost and they have no gatekeepers. So you could decide tomorrow I'm going to start a zine and you don't have to ask for permission, and you have full editorial control. And especially, for example, the trans community, who are so often being spoken of and about rather than being allowed to, represent themselves. I think it provides a really kind of fertile space to be able to share experiences that you wouldn't necessarily get to share in any other space. So yeah, I think I think zines in particular are probably the most kind of long-lasting kind of method that's come out of this kind of feminist media production, because like zine making workshops in particular, where you can get people to kind of think about what they want to talk about, are super popular. So I think there's something about the fact that it's low cost, doesn't really require a lot of technical expertise. Theoretically, if you've got like a bunch of A4 paper and you can fold it up, you can make a zine. And also the fact that you've got full editorial control means that I don't think that they will stop being something that people use.
The zine came from women already organising, supporting each other and building spaces of their own.
At the heart of much of that work was the Women's Centre, which changed names many times over the years, but stayed important to thousands of local women.
We spoke to 2 women about feminism, community and being gay in the Northeast during the 1980s. I was really grateful for these conversations. They spoke very honestly about difficult things, but there was warmth and humour in it too.
As some of what they describe is still shocking now. This is a small part of that conversation.
During the 80s, I came out as a gay woman, and I was married at that time. And what happened for me was my husband contested the custody of my daughter because I was gay, so obviously an unfit mother. And we went through a horrendous legal court case with a judge who came out of retirement because I think he wanted his name associated with that. And what the end result of that is that my husband got custody of my child. And it was just such distressing time for me, for her. Even like with my daughter, just like things like, I don't know who's picking me up from school, and I don't know if I'm going to my dad's, or I don't know if I'm going to my mum's. Those kind of things for a child. Like you shouldn't have to be concerned about what's going to happen and all the rest of it. When I was going through that, I felt very isolated and alone, and then it was interesting when I was doing that role that I got so much contact with other women from all over the country. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I finished that work was I wanted to start a group for lesbian mothers who might be going through the whole experience in our area. But the lesbian women that I spoke to were so frightened of anything being found out and being used against them in, potential court cases and things like that, that it didn't really take off. Or, I was part of the lesbian line in Middlesbrough, and often we'd get, phone calls so people could get individual support that way. But it was a really difficult time.
Yeah, I was working for the local authority in the 70s and 80s and working in communities, and I was working over at Pallister Park, and we built an amazing adventure playground, and we had some fantastic activities that we used to do with loads of young people around there. And I think it was actually one or two people on the estate that took a bit of a dislike to me, and they reported a particular incident that they thought that they'd seen around my sexuality. And it was, they wanted to investigate it, so I was suspended. And it turns out the date of the incident, I was actually in hospital getting a pot off my leg at the time. So they didn't have anything to stand on really. But they'd suspended me, and they were trying to then look at anything that they could do to throw something at me so that I wouldn't get my job back.
So they felt like your sexuality was a threat to the community?
Yeah, to the kids, really.
Yeah.
So I got a job in an office, which I could do literally in 2.5 days, but I was on protected salary, so I said thank you very much, and I took that job. But I was quite bored in that job, so what I decided to do was I was involved in Algo anyway, so I became a trade union representative, a welfare officer, an assistant branch secretary as well, because I wanted to be active and I wanted to help people. And at its highest point, the Women's Centre was catering for 750 women a year and 60 kids in the creche, all getting fantastically positive messages. And, you know, it kind of did everything from like maths and English, like literacy and numeracy, and it did ESOL. But by the time we'd finished, we were actually doing courses that were getting them into university. And then there was all sorts of courses that were a bit out the box at the time, because if you lived in South Bank at the time, you didn't cuddle each other because you definitely were queer, right?
I remember Winnie, but I had friends in Winnie Bangs.
Yeah. So what happened was we started to introduce things like, because my mum was always interested in aromatherapy, and we were always interested in crystals and everything like that. So the way it got introduced was I had a little bottle of oil on the side of my desk, and a woman came in to me and she said, "What's that for?" And I said, "I'm just going to do my mum's back tomorrow." And she said, "Oh, what do you do with it?" And I said, "Oh, you massage it." So she said, "Oh, will you do my hands?" And I said, "Yeah." So I massaged her hands, and she was like, "Oh, this is magic." And then the next day, a woman came in and she said, "Oh, I've got a problem with my knee." And I thought, well, it was okay. She had a skirt on, so I was able to do a knee. And then about 2 weeks later, another woman came in. She had a poorly back, and I went, "Hang on there." And I got Reg from Cleveland College to actually put, like, I think it was at level 1 in aromatherapy at the time. And then, like, that took off in the Women's Centre, and then it was, they did level 2, and then they were off, you know. But what I really noticed was, because we were starting to make contact with each other, like you'd have a Pakistani woman or a Bangladeshi woman get massaged by a white British woman. Mm-hmm. And it got to some point where we didn't even have to do equal opportunities training or anything like that. The women were just completely engaged with each other and looking after each other. Yeah. And that was amazing to see. So we did, you know, educational type of courses, but we also did the likes of belly dancing and cooking and everything, because we wanted to have a laugh.
I think one of those good stories about the community of women around there was that one of the asylum seekers came, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry I'm late. I've had stones thrown through my windows." Yeah. And like the women group that were sitting there were outraged by it. And the woman said, "Don't worry about it, it's just stones, it's not bullets." And it's something that hit those women in the heart. And those women all had children, well, in about half an hour
It was sorted.
There was no problem whatsoever. They'd gone home, they'd found out who the culprits were and stopped it. It was like, right.
But it was
women on the move.
Yeah, but it showed how powerful.
Those women who met down our road in somebody's front room with a cup of tea, or a glass of wine sometimes, who managed to be the catalyst for lots of other fantastic feminist projects, women's projects in the area. So it's unfortunate that, unfortunately, they've all passed away, and I'm delighted to be part of this project, because one thing that I wanted to do was they all had children as well as myself having children, and I've always thought that I want to write something down or record something for them about how fantastically active, vibrant, difference-making their mums were. And, it's made me feel a bit just talking about it.
And what I used to say to the staff that worked for me is, when that woman walks in that door, just love her. That's all she wants, to be loved. She'll drop her baggage and she'll be okay. So it's as much for women now, like young girls, because I do a lot of work still in the community, and a lot of love and understanding goes a long way. All anybody wants is, when you hold your hand out, is somebody to get hold of it.
Listening back, I kept thinking about how much women once had to carry quietly. It's still frustrating being a woman in lots of ways, but there's also more language now, more openness, more space to speak about things women once felt they had to laugh off or swallow quickly.
This whole journey has been an emotional one. Joyful, but often confronting, especially when we think about progress, history repeating itself, and fractures within the movement.
And I think you can see some links over between oppression around women and oppression around gay women and oppression around transgender women. Are kind of like, you can see kind of waves of the same kind of links that go on, you know, as
a lot of the rhetoric that's now being used to condemn the trans community was exactly what was used for lesbians, for gay people.
Yeah.
It's just coming round and round and round.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
obviously, personal use, I had to just look through the whole archive to see if there was any mention of transgender or any sort of trans activism whatsoever. I mean, I know for a fact that a lot of it was included in that without saying it outright. But that also runs into the issue that we have today, is people thinking that it came out from nowhere because it was never directly named.
No, it is interesting to see how, you know, some of the stuff they were fighting for is stuff that we're sort of still fighting for. I don't know, Sisterhood's always been like a weird thing to me, because I'm very much, throughout my childhood, you know, I was very, you know, growing up as like that sort of girl, that sort of outspoken, doesn't stand for sexism type girl, but then when I found out I was a trans man, I was worried I was going to sort of lose that connection to my feminism, when I realised I don't have to, you know. It's like, I don't know, it's like I thought, I'm not allowed to talk about this anymore because I'm a guy. That's not true. I've experienced everything they've experienced. What impacts them still impacts me. So I'm not going to shut up about it. No. If I try to enter a feminist circle these days, I feel like I have to be careful. It's that weird place for me right now. I know it's like, it's hard to explain. I still have all those beliefs about equality and standing up when, you know, people are being shitty about women, and it's finding out where do I now fit into that it's kind of been a bit of a minefield for me.
I think one of the big things that stuck out for me is being younger than half the room. You look back at some of the older issues, especially from like the 70s and 80s, and you do get a little feeling of too much scale, in that these are some of the issues that keep happening, have been happening since the 70s and 80s, and yet haven't been sorted. And people talk about how, well, there's different issues today, but that almost comes off as there's just more issues today. And you get a little worried that sometimes it might not just be that we've got different issues, but it could just be that we have more than we started with, and it's ever increasing. And you don't know if you're helping slow that push of new issues, or it's all kind of pointless. And that, at the moment, still makes me feel very angry, in a sort of righteous, positive anger sort of way. Because you look at all of these issues and people want to act like things are better now. And in some ways they are, and we're allowed to celebrate those victories. But in other ways, you look at it and you just go, are they that much better? Or are they just shuffled around a bit?
I picked this magazine up originally because it was women in college life, and I'm a university student, nearly finished my first year now, and I'm studying history, so I like to study the history. I call it the history of me. Like, I like to study women's history, working class history of the Northeast, and history of university. And so I picked this up and I've been reading it, and it just struck me how much of the same is still happening. It's just everything's now online and it's much more social media. Like, one of the first things I read was I got to university and everyone was posh and no one was from a working class background, and I'm like, yeah, I feel that. Like, why hasn't that changed? It sparked a lot of questions in me, but also I've also realised how much has changed for the better as well, how far we have come. Because in this workshop, there's been a lot of, nothing's changed, there's a lot that hasn't changed, but really, there has been a lot that's changed, and it's because of things like this. It's because of these magazines, it's because of people sharing their ideas, and you don't really get that much anymore. And so, yeah, it's given me a lot to think about.
No, so what I was saying is that I think there's two things. One is that, especially kind of during the Thatcher years, especially in Spare Rib, will talk a lot about kind of things like cuts to benefits, kind of like representation of people on welfare, representation of disabled people who need to access kind of welfare benefits, and how much that you could lift that out of that context and put it into today, and it would not read out of place at all. So there is a lot of ways in which we've made lots of progress, and there are lots of ways in where the progress is made is either being made and is being retreated, or we just haven't made any progress. And there are some issues where I think we have actively gone backwards. So in Spare Rib, for example, in the 80s, there was one article about trans women. It was very positive. It was a kind of first person account of a trans person's experience. Spare Rib, there was one article which was very negative, but in general there wasn't the same kind of like level of vitriol that we see today. And I think so it's important to remember that, again, like, progress isn't linear. So there are some, we can't be kind of complacent, and we have to kind of always think about it as kind of like a continuing movement rather than something that, you know, I don't think there'll ever be a day where we kind of can say everything is done. It has to be something that we're constantly working at.
I'm still worrying or wondering if there is a place for more good law, more good legislation, more good rights, more proper rights for everyone. Human should respect human without any red of light, without any narrow-minded, without any concern that questioning each other, are you, why and how and what.
This project fills me with such pride. Women weren't only fighting for what they called women's issues. They were fighting for communities, fairness, visibility and each other.
And so much of that history only survives because of the women who refuse to let it disappear. And that's why this project has been so important to document.
Yeah, it's left me with tears, thoughts, anger, rage, sleepless nights, memories, times that I'd forgotten about. It's been a real pleasure, and just the fact that it's women and what they've managed to achieve. What do you think as a younger person?
I think it's been really inspiring, especially to meet women who have just dug their heels in to the scene and have made change after change after change. And it's like 30 years of their effects on their community. That's been really wonderful to hear about.
Yeah, and I thought it was really telling when somebody mentioned the fact that there's not, that we're losing a lot of women from that age. Mm-hmm. So this is why this project's so important, because otherwise there's not going to be a paper trail of how absolutely amazing and awesome these women were and how much they love the communities.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so wonderful that Teesside Archives are giving us a place to store all of these memories and information before they just get, discarded in people's attics after they've passed.
Yeah, and I really hope that our listeners will maybe go down a bit of a memory trail, or imagine that although we say nothing's changed and it's still the same, if you think back to the 80s, it was a completely different landscape, and hopefully the readers will get that. Listeners. See, I'm from the 80s, I still say readers rather than listeners. I hope that the listeners out there in this wonderful world will realise that when Teesside was Cleveland all those years ago, it was still fierce women. Don't just think of the steelworks, think about the women.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you for listening to the new Sisterhood. Stories of women, activism, allyship and sisterhood from the 1980s and today. As usual, we're going to leave you with a poem.
I'm glad to have the privilege of being born to two cultures. I'm glad to have the privilege of loving both sexes. I'm glad to know and have the privilege of being left alone. I'm glad I've been young and have the fear of growing old. I wish I was louder, I wish I was nicer, I wish I could be the freedom of the world. Then I'd know I'd made a difference and that I could be the change, and then I could feel peace for once.
I'm glad to have the privilege to be a strong, independent woman. I'm glad to have the privilege to have my own bank account, my own car, my own career, own autonomy of my body. I'm glad to have the privilege to live on my own, and I'm glad to have the privilege to walk on my own at night.
I am happy to have the privilege of being a human being, not an animal. I am happy to know I have the privilege of being a black, brown person. I am glad to keep holding on to the person I am. I am glad to keep moving because I hope to be great in life. I wish I was not pinned down as a disabled person who cannot help herself in all my day-to-day activities. I wish I could be better. That's what I am now.
I'm glad to have the privilege of being raised a girl. I'm glad to have the privilege of knowing how they're pushed into certain roles, how they're treated by adults when they go through puberty, how they're forced to grow so much quicker than boys. I'm glad to know their dreams and fears. I hope it will make me a better man.
I'm glad to have the privilege of being aware of who I am. I'm glad to have the privilege of honoring my ancestors. I'm glad to know the privilege of fighting for my rights. I'm glad to have been and hope to go on giving people the hand they need. I wish I was strong enough to voice my concerns louder. I wish I was more open and not be scared. I wish I could be the voice of people who are oppressed. Then I'd know I was winning in my life, that I could be at peace, that I could be safe in a place.